It was just past midnight when my farmhouse windows started to tremble like a train was already passing by, and for a split second I thought it was a storm rolling in over the fields, until I stepped out onto the porch and saw that the sky above my corn wasn't dark at all anymore, but blazing white, lit up by a web of floodlights, engines roaring, metal screaming, cranes swinging massive concrete pillars over the land my family had worked for 3 generations. And in the middle of that chaos, standing on a temporary platform with a megaphone like she owned the county, was Clarissa Vale, self-appointed queen of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Council, yelling about progress and the future of our community, while her project ripped my fences apart and sent my cattle crashing through the night in blind panic. In that moment, watching concrete legs being planted in the middle of my cornfield without a vote, without a letter, without so much as a knock on my door, I understood with a kind of cold clarity that this wasn't about transit or traffic or any of the pretty buzzwords Clarissa loved to use. This was about power, about one woman proving she could take whatever she wanted, and if I let her turn my farm into a bridge support, I'd be the one who handed her the shovel. So right then and there I decided she was in for the fight of her life, even if it felt like I was just one tired farmer staring down a machine made of money, lawyers, and pastel blazers. By sunrise, the lights were gone and the engines were quiet, but my land looked like a battlefield after the army packed up, with corn torn into ragged rows, tire tracks tattooed into the soil, and 5 gaping holes yawning where they'd started sinking foundations for their elevated railway. So I walked those scars with a mug of coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, filming everything, narrating like a TV host just to keep from screaming, calling out, today's forecast, concrete showers, with a 100% chance of lawsuits, trying to make a joke out of something that felt like a punch to the gut, because this wasn't just dirt to me. It was Harrison soil, the place where my father taught me to read the weather by watching swallows skim the pond, and where my grandfather measured time by the height of the corn on the 4th of July. I called Sheriff Cole Barrett, watched him walk the perimeter, shake his head, tell me he couldn't shut it down without a court order, tell me to document everything and not to go into this alone. And then I drove to the Maple Ridge Estates Community Center, that beige building that smells like lemon cleaner and quiet threats, carrying 3 copies of the HOA covenants and a binder full of rising anger. And I sat across from Clarissa in a conference room with a watercolor lake on the wall while she slid a glossy brochure toward me with the words Skyline Loop printed in friendly font and smiling children under a shadowless track. And she said phrases like extraordinary improvements and community easement and collective benefit, as if those words gave her the right to carve a viaduct through my farm. When I pointed at the covenants and showed her there was nothing in there about seizing private farmland, she smiled that tight, sharp smile and quoted another section the way a preacher flips pages to find the verse that suits him, telling me the board had legal counsel, implying that I should stay in my lane, that a man who works the soil couldn't possibly understand the complexities of development. And then, when she realized I wasn't going to fold, she switched tactics and offered me a goodwill stipend, as if there was a number big enough to unpour concrete out of the holes in my fields. And when I told her what I wanted was my land back, she gave me the line every bully with a title eventually gives: "We'll take your concerns under advisement." The same afternoon, an orange violation envelope appeared on my mailbox accusing me of non-compliant fencing, the very section their forklift had driven through. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just a fight in the open. This was going to be a quiet war of paper cuts and fines and threats. So I made a folder on my computer called Skyline Lies, filled it with videos, timestamps, photos, receipts, vet bills, every sentence Clarissa had thrown at me. And when the neighborhood Facebook group deleted my post showing the midnight floodlights and labeled it divisive, I forwarded the footage to a local reporter, Jenna Rhodes, who wrote back on it, which felt like the first small gust of wind at my back after days of standing alone. The next twist came in the form of a crumpled site sketch I found near the creek, a rough drawing of the rail line cutting straight across my farm and half the subdivision, stamped by Cole Structural Engineering with no county seal. And when I called the number, the engineer, Ethan Cole, told me to meet him after dark by the creek with no cameras. And that night, I walked into a scene that looked less like a community project and more like an invasion. Flatbed trucks lined up like an iron snake, cranes swinging beams, generators screaming, Clarissa in her pastel blazer in the middle of it all barking orders through a radio like a general on a battlefield, and Ethan standing beside me at the tree line. Voice low as he explained that the foundations were too shallow, the beams underrated, the soil conditions ignored, that one good storm or overloaded train could bring the whole thing down, not just on my land, but on the houses they planned to run it behind. When security spotted us and flashlights cut through the trees, we ran like we were the trespassers, crashing through branches, splashing across the creek while voices shouted behind us. And later, at my kitchen table, Rachel Wells, my lawyer, spread Ethan's blueprints out like x-rays and said they were both a gift and a nightmare, enough to win, enough to bury Clarissa, but also dangerous. Because people who forge ahead without permits and safety checks don't usually hesitate to hurt anyone who threatens their plans. And sure enough, the next days brought a lien notice for thousands of dollars in bogus fees, messages telling me to drop it or else, red spray paint screaming sell out or get out, across my barn door, and a black SUV sitting at the end of my driveway at midnight with the engine idling just long enough to make its point before rolling away. I didn't back down. I pushed further, uploaded a blurred snippet of the schematics with a simple question: would you trust this over your home without permits? And watched as the neighborhood finally split. Some people still parroting trust the HOA, while others started to feel the cold finger of doubt on their necks. So Clarissa threw an emergency meeting, with folding chairs and cheap cookies and a security guard as big as a refrigerator, and she tried to turn the whole room against me by reading off a stack of violations and inflating fake fines until I supposedly owed more than $18,000, painting me as a rule breaker. A problem, a man who didn't respect the community. But when she wouldn't show a single real permit number and I said, calm and clear, we'll see whose story holds up in court, the air shifted in a way she didn't like. The day we walked into the Redwood County Courthouse, with reporters outside and half the town watching, I felt like I was hauling my entire life into that room in one battered binder. And on the other side of the aisle sat the Maple Ridge legal machine. 3 expensive attorneys and Clarissa at the center like the star of her own show. But once the testimony started, the glitter on her crown began to peel. The county planner admitted no permit had ever been issued. Ethan explained in simple, terrifying detail how unsafe the structure was. Rachel put financial records on the projector, showing $500,000 consulting fees routed into an account tied to Clarissa, and every time their lawyer tried to paint me as a bitter obstructionist, the facts dragged him back to the same ugly truth. This wasn't progress. It was theft and corruption on stilts. I told the jury about the night the floodlights lit up my field, about the cows scattering, about the holes dug without permission, about the notes, the spray paint, the SUV at my gate. And I tried to keep my voice steady, not because I wasn't angry, but because I knew anger wasn't what would convince them. The pattern would. The trespass, the lies, the forged signatures, the intimidation. And when Rachel reminded them in closing that bylaws are not crowns and HOAs don't stand above the law, I watched a few jurors glance from her to Clarissa and see, finally, who was really out of control. The verdict came back faster than anyone expected. They found in my favor, awarded $5 million in damages, and ordered the illegal structure dismantled and my land restored. And while I was still trying to wrap my head around hearing that number out loud in a courtroom with my name attached to it, state investigators walked in with a warrant and handcuffed Clarissa right there in front of the same neighbors who used to flinch when she raised her eyebrow at a flower pot, charging her with fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. And in that moment, watching the woman who tried to turn my life into a concrete corridor walk out in cuffs, I finally felt the tightness in my chest start to ease. In the weeks that followed, the pillars came down under court supervision. The holes were filled, grass and corn replaced rebar and mud. The HOA board crumbled, the charter was dissolved, and when the check arrived, $5 million written in numbers I never imagined seeing next to my name. I used it to rebuild my fences and barns, invest in better equipment, set aside something for my kids, and start a fund to help other homeowners fight back when their HOAs crossed the line from community standards into tyranny, because I knew my story wasn't unique, just louder. Now, when I walk my fields at sunset, with the cicadas singing and the wind moving through whole rows instead of concrete gaps, I think about how close I came to losing all of this to a woman who believed a title and a gavel made her the law. And I think about the simple lesson that grew out of all that noise. That power only works as long as people bow to it. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to show up anyway. And that sometimes standing your ground isn't just about defending your own fence line. It's about drawing a line for everyone watching. So let me leave you with this, and I want you to really think about it. If your HOA, your boss, your local queen bee tried to carve straight through what you love in the name of progress, would you roll over to keep the peace? Or would you risk being called difficult, disobedient, even selfish, to defend your home and your dignity? And in a world where rules can be twisted and titles abused, where do you think real justice ends and blind obedience begins?